The Bluff is a coastal site with easy laminar air flying. There is a vertical difference of 70 meters and a ceiling of 180 meters, with the airspace above being controlled airspace via the local tower. The site works in a south-southeast to an east-southeast wind, with the ideal wind being a southeaster at a minimum of 8 knots. Due to local weather systems, it's not often you get the correct prevailing wind direction, a usable wind speed, and clear blue skies. Normally, the southeaster is post-frontal and can contain residual moisture. There are 2 main usable areas for takeoff and landing, the north and south takeoffs. Primarily, the south one is used for takeoffs and landings, with the north one only really used for landings on strong wind days. Some key landmarks to note are the radar station to the south beyond the river gap, the road nearest the landing beach for recovery via a car, the raised power lines running down the stairway, which can also be used to walk back up, the first servitude, which can be used to walk back up. However, this passes an informal settlement and I wouldn't recommend it. The second servitude, which can be used to get back to the road should you bottom land if you are heading north, and Anstey's beach parking, which usually is as far north as one can get. The takeoff can be tricky as there is little room for error on strong wind days, and the top landing can also prove a challenge to novice pilots, especially those flying slower wings on strong wind days. I would recommend to fly this site if you have decent ground handling, specifically you have mastered a technique to kill your wing as quickly as possible. So let's talk about the takeoff. What makes this a little trickier than it seems are a few factors. Number 1 is the airspeed misalignment. Number 2 is the presence of dangerous objects behind takeoff. And number 3, the takeoff area is quite short. So first of all, there's a large difference in the airspeed at ground level and the airspeed at the height of your wing. And this is mainly due to the ridge topography. There's always an extra 5-ish kilometers an hour at the height of your wing, and that's caught out more than one experienced pilot. So to take off at the Bluff, make sure you lay out as far forward as possible on the takeoff. If you're going to get dragged, there's not a lot of room, and the objects behind are closer than they appear. Don't be scared to ask someone to anchor you at this site. On a slow wing, you can very quickly get dragged back, or you can get plucked and get pushed back into the telephone lines, or worse, you can land on a spiked fence behind the takeoff. If you find you need to forward launch at this site to get your wing inflated, I wouldn't take off, because this means your flight is going to last about a minute. There must be enough wind to reverse launch your wing for you to be able to take off. If you're looking at the ocean, if there are some sporadic white caps, that means you're already on the upper limit of what the wind speed should be. Now, this won't feel at takeoff like it's close to the limit, but because of the little difference between your height and the height of the wing, the airspeed difference, it will actually be quite strong already. So if you see a few white caps, be prepared to pull up and turn immediately to get your weight into your wing. Once you are airborne, the flying is easy coastal soaring. There's just a few things to remember. Number 1, the compression zone over the takeoff means you could be blown over the back, especially on a slow wing. So make sure you stay as far forward as possible on this site. On a strong day, the lift band can even be well out over the water, and you want to stay at the front of the lift band. If you find yourself going backwards, you need to face straight out and get on the speed bar as quickly as possible. Some other things to note, there are some obstacles on the ridge, a couple telephone lines and power lines. Just keep an eye on them, you'll usually be above them. But as you go to the very south, if you're low, remember that they're right there on the ridge line. If you cross the gap to the south towards the radar beacon, remember if you land on that side of the canal, there's a sewage-filled canal between you and any vehicular recovery. So really think about it before you cross that gap. You don't want to land on the other side and have to wade through sewage to get back to your car. If you're flying north, immediately after you leave the takeoff area, there's a low section, and on a light day, you won't be able to make it across this low section. There is a servitude that can get you from the beach back up to a parking lot. So as soon as you fly over this low section, make sure you get eyes on the servitude so you know where to head if you do land at the bottom. If you head north to Anstey's beach, you need a fast wing to cross that gap. This section's got several kilometers where if you bottom land, you're going to have to walk a few kilometers on sand back to Anstey's beach. And if you do make it to the harbour mouth, enjoy the view, But remember, anywhere you land over there is no man's land and you've got a long walk on sand. Remember on coastal sites to always keep an eye on the water, and if you see any increase in wind coming, land immediately. Let's talk about landings. So top landings can be the most technical part of the site, especially when the wind is strong. When you look at the site, you'll see there is a road that runs along the top of the ridge. Never ever fly behind that road. Treat that as the furthest back you're ever going to fly. Ideally, you never actually want to be above the road. You want to be above the barrier to the side of the road. If the wind is strong, rather top land at the north takeoff area. The air is sinky and it's slightly protected from the wind speed. There's also a lot more space in order to get your landing right. When landing at the south site, you want to fly along the ridge. When close to the landing, you turn a little bit to fly just above the fence line and turn in late to land facing the ocean. This technique can be very dangerous on a strong day as the slower wings can get stuck with no penetration. The lift band also gets much wider with a strong wind and you simply can't come down in this area. I've done some weird things to get in on strong days, such as flying directly towards the ridge with big ears, but I wouldn't ever recommend that to anyone. You choose the risks that you want to take. If you have any worries about top landing, please land at the bottom. You can fly out to sea, it's perfectly safe, lose your altitude, come back in, turn and land into the wind on the beach, pack your wing up and be recovered from there. Ideally, you want to try land quite close to the canal just to make your life easier with your recovery back to the car. There are no site fees to fly at the Bluff. However, one of the neighbors keeps the grass cut at his own expense, so if he needs a space for overflow parking at his house, please give him priority. You do need to hold a SAPA license to fly here. There are numbers to call when flying here in order to inform people that you will be in the air. It's important that you phone when you open the site and when you close. So when you arrive and you know you're going to take off, you need to call, and when you leave, you need to call again to tell them that you're finished. The numbers can change, so I've put them in the description. It's the local air tower and the local Air Force base. There's also a link in the description for the local weather station, which you can use to read the current wind speed and wind direction. If you are an experienced or an intermediate pilot, this site should offer little to no problems. You can park your car right at the takeoff. The flying is easy soaring, and you can enjoy the views of the ocean while you fly. If you are a beginner pilot, I would not recommend going here by yourself. I would recommend going with someone more experienced, and I would recommend letting them help you launch the first couple of times because the wind might be doing things that you're not aware of. Above all with this site, remember that if you are forward, you are safe. So if anything's going wrong, just head out towards the sea. If you find yourself with no penetration, step on your speed bar and get out in front of the ridge as fast as possible. The only real danger with this site is collisions with objects behind the takeoff or being blown over the back completely. So as long as you're in front of those with decent penetration, you shouldn't have a problem. Enjoy the flying.